Great to see everybody tonight. Thank you so much for coming to Molly's Salon with Laura Penn. So the last 10 minutes, I'm going to open it up to you all, so if you can think of any burning questions you have for Laura or for me, and then we can go out to the bar and have something to drink if you'd like to talk to Laura
and Molly.
And me as well. So Laura, we share many things in common. But one thing we really share is an absolute love for travel. And when I look back on some traveling that I really enjoyed doing, at one point my partner Suzanne and I went to Bali, and we watched in Ubud and in different villages a whole new production being built and made, and we would be there until like 2 in the morning watching. And another time my former husband and I went to China in '84 and bought 1/4 of a mile of silk, which we hauled back for big silk drops for silk and brocade costumes for a production called Water of Life in Alaska. So I know you are a traveler with a purpose. So would you talk to us about one of the trips that you've taken, and what did you learn?
What a way to start. The thing I love about travel, and I started in my mid-20s, started doing kind of adventurous trips, if you will, outside of the country, although I've been drawn to doing them inside of the country. But I like being sort of pushed to the edge of my envelope, like to be in environments where all I really have is my wits, where I don't really know where I am or what I'm doing or the people around me. There's something about that place that makes me feel, I know it's not going to make sense when I say it makes me feel centered. Like it sort of distills it down to sort of the very essence. So where that has been, traveled to India before cell phones and, when you had to travel with your vaccination passport. We all know what those are now. I love Central America. Guatemala is a place that I've returned to many times, having been there the first time in the late 80s. But I actually, one of the trips I took most recently was I took a road trip. So I'd been to all but 5 states in the US. And I had a sabbatical from work, and I got in my car by myself, left the family, just me, and I went to go to the 5 states that I had not been to, which are clustered sort of in the north central area of the country. So it was North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Iowa, and Nebraska. So I headed up through Canada and came down into Michigan and then back around and into the Dakotas. And South Dakota, Suzanne, we've talked about this, but like South Dakota sort of, I think it's one of the most important places that we should all see and experience and breathe and be part of the life force and the joy and the sorrow. It feels to me like much of the shame of our nation lives in South Dakota, kind of right next to like the power and the life force. It was just an extraordinary trip for me, and I just kind of drove around, and then I went to Colorado and saw a friend, and I was going to go all the way across Nebraska and come straight home, but I went back into South Dakota because I had to see it again. And I'm going there this spring. I have some friends that are working on a theater project, and I have been, Larissa Fasthorse and Michael John Garces,
Yes.
we're working on a project and have invited me to come visit and witness a little bit of what they're doing.
I love that. I love that. And you also were in Mexico, right?
I
Jose
was.
Rivera.
I was, oh, right.
Talk
yeah.
about what that
Well,
is,
that
what
same
kind of a
trip.
search that is.
So the road trip that I took, I was someplace in some, I don't know, Motel 8 or whatever they are. What it was called? Anyhow. And there, they have the brochures about what you should see, and there was a slip from the Detroit Art Museum, and there was a photographic exhibit on road trips. So I was like, I'm gonna go through Detroit, go to the Detroit Art Museum and see this exhibit. So I saw this exhibit, and I came around the corner. If you've been to the Detroit Art Museum, have you been there? I mean, what an incredible story that I didn't really realize until I walked into this courtyard, and it's the Diego Rivera industrial murals. And I stumbled on them, and I had no idea they existed. And it is, it took my breath away, as it does now, because I didn't know what they were, how they got there, I didn't know the story. So I sat there, and I've since, then I took about reading and trying to understand how Edsel Ford could commission Diego Rivera in 1930 to do a bunch of murals. I mean, it's like the Marxist comes to town. I mean, I just didn't understand. And I still don't fully understand how that happened, because shortly thereafter, he did murals in New York that were the Rockefellers destroyed. So I decided to I went to Mexico City, and that was last August. And I put together, the whole trip was around Diego Rivera murals. So I traveled the city and the area just to look at his work, and discovered, he did this thing for the public school. I don't know, there's like 100 murals. It's just, his work is incredible. And we talk a lot about Frida Kahlo, who was a genius, and it's the life story, I think we all know, is incredibly powerful. And Diego Rivera was a bit of a, not maybe, he'd have some troubles right now. I can just say. But he was, he's an extraordinary artist, leader, a great mind. So I spent, 10 days in Mexico City, just going from like one series of, it was an organizing principle.
So it's so fascinating, isn't it, when you follow what Laura does on her travels, and the way she says, you take in all of this information and somehow she's more centered. So then take us then to your work as the head of the Society of Directors and Choreographers. And how do you take what it is? Am I bumping around with the sound, you guys? Or is it okay?
Just once.
Just once? Okay. How then do you take what... Do you think this is me? You think it's me?
Yes.
Yeah.
What should I do? Do we have anybody here in the house? Rachel, do I need to move this? I'm just wondering. Rachel, do I need to move this? Because the sound is popping. See, this is being done for posterity.
Good.
See, and it just went clunk again.
Yeah.
Is that me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what am I
Well,
doing?
what's clunking is the question, I
I think it's that thing beside you.
think. They'll move you right on. Just stand
I
perfectly
think
still.
it's that. I think it's that.
What if I take this out
Yeah.
and put it here?
The B-roll is not.
Now, tell me, is this okay now?
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, that's good. So, how do you take that information that you learn when you're traveling? Because she travels solo. She travels oftentimes by herself too. And then how do you use it within your work as really the head of a union, which is a raucous union, because it's directors and choreographers, and particularly directors talk a lot. So how do you use that?
Well, I think the first thing it does for it's restful to me to be, it's restful for me to be challenged in a way. Like I'm not, oh, I should go to the beach. Like I should go to the beach. But that's not where I am drawn to rest. So I do get rest and I get rejuvenated and I get, my mind for me gets exercised, which then allows me to be more fully in the moment and in the space of everybody else's, if you will. But I also feel like, you know, which I said this just briefly backstage, I'm running a union. I'm not like a labor leader. That's not what I set out to do. And I don't know that I'd run any other union but the one I run, because directors are historians and like experts in cultural, historical people experiences, right? I mean, every time you do a project, you dive into another world. And so it gives me, that's my way of diving into, those are like my little productions are my travels, right? So it's, you know, where it's like, I'm gonna go do this. So it's, and then I'm able to bring that to the table, I hope, as, you know, we're being interested in the world. Directors are interested in the world. So there's like some synergy.
Yep.
And there's some sense that I can handle it, maybe, because I can, right? So it's like, oh, I mean, I use it a little bit because people will be like, you did what? I'm like, yeah, that's what I do. Which I suppose, as you say that, yeah, I suppose it works, right? Because it sort of sets up an expectation, right? That
Sets up an expectation that this is somebody who could go anywhere, do anything, and come back whole. And so as you move through any kinds of negotiations, oftentimes they get quite complex. And your ability to be able to find a way through and a pathway through, which is like traveling in a foreign country.
No,
And then you can bring people back whole.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't tied those together. I thought I was just getting away and resting. But it's a bit of all that. Yeah.
Well, I don't think there's anything like travel, right?
No.
There's really nothing like travel. You get to be in your own movie. You get to be able to have conversations with yourself. You get to live another life. You get to see a whole different way of being, a whole different way of living. So I'm going to take you back because Laura was here at Arena Stage when Zelda was here. My favorite Zelda story is, she said to me, the winner is the last one standing. I've always remembered that. And I think it's really true. The winner is the last one standing. So tell us what your favorite Zelda story or sayings are. What are things that have driven you? Because Zelda was the great architect. She was the architect of the not-for-profit theater movement, right? And she created so much for all of us in the theater. And Laura, you were there in the 80s, right?
I was here, yeah. I was here with, there's Catherine Irwin. I was here in the the glory, heady days of the NEA ongoing ensemble grant, when there were like 29 members in the acting company year round. The work was extraordinary. And I worked in the box office. Okay, good afternoon, Arena Stage. You didn't even have to answer the phone because you were tied this headset and there was a light that flashed in front of you and a little clicker here and you just clicked the thing, good afternoon, Arena Stage. good afternoon, we're in the stage. And then we converted like the first online ticketing system. And so I, went to the subscription office and, then we did that. And then I went to work at Living Stage with Catherine and Bob Alexander. I spent, particularly when I was in the box office, there was a lot of, you're stuck in the box office, nobody likes us in the box office, nobody mean to us in the box office, nobody respects us in the box office. And I was like, well, we gotta get out of the box office. And nobody wanted to, there were big bags of mail that came in those big, like, mail bags, right? And then we'd get 2 mail bags, like, a day. And we had to sort them in the box office and then, walk around the building and give everybody their mail. And people in the box office hated doing that because it was like the grunt work and they don't respect us, they make us sort their mail. And I was like, I think sorting the mail and delivering the mail seems like actually pretty cool. Because who's getting what mail?
Right.
So it was like
Right.
the
And can I
graduate.
open the mail for somebody?
Well, I couldn't open it. I hadn't gotten to that point yet. So I couldn't, but I sure could read all the postcards Zelda would get for Cast Me.
Sure.
You saw, and all the return addresses of all the theaters. Like, if I didn't know the names of all that. I feel like I still know the names of many theaters in the country from sorting the mail.
Oh, interesting.
And going around the building, and then it was like, who are all these people? What do they do? And every time I saw Zelda, because, we're in the box office, Zelda, you're never going to meet Zelda because you work in the box office. So every time I saw Zelda, I would say, hi Zelda, I'm Laura Penn. And I'd introduce my student. And finally one day, just outside of the one of the VOMs for the arena, I said, hi Zelda. She said, I know you're Laura Penn. You work in the box office. And I thought, I've arrived. But I think of that often when I think of her. I know you're Laura Penn. You work in the box office. So that's one of my favorite Zelda moments. And then, years later, when I was running Intimon Theater in Seattle, and she was, she traveled to do speeches, and Bart Shear was the artistic director with me for quite a while, and they knew each other. He, I think, directed students at NYU, and anyhow, so I sort of reacquainted myself with Zelda. I know you Laura Penn. Now I was at Intimon. And so we became, I started to develop a relationship with her, which was different, right? Because many years had passed. And when I got to SDC, I called her and, why am I doing, here's what I'm doing next, which she thought was pretty interesting. And she talks a lot about being tough in the service of something that is tender. And so she said, really to hold on to that in this job. But I can remember when I was in Seattle complaining, because it was so hard, it's so hard, it's so hard, Zelda, it's so hard. And Zelda would say to me over the years, when I'd say, it's really, how are you doing? It's really hard. And she'd say, Laura, it has always been hard. And I think, it's kind of like the last one standing, right? It has always been hard. Now, I do wonder what she'd say right now. I mean, because has it always been hard like it's been hard lately?
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's always been hard.
Yeah, I often wonder what she would say about this moment in time. Because she always had a path forward, didn't she?
Yeah.
She always had another way to look at things. Like, I remember at one point, I said to her, our season ticket holders are around 50 to 60. And she said, they've always been 50 to 60. I said, what do you mean? She said, when we started the theater in 1950, they were always 50 to 60. And I said, why is that? And she said, because people come back to the theater when they have grown and had their children. They come back to meaning. And they won't come back if you haven't somehow ignited them when they are young people. But they will come back again for meaning. And I thought, it's really true. Because people will often complain to me and say, oh, season ticket holders, they're older, and it's kind of, they've always been older. So, so I wonder what she would have to say about right now. I wonder what she would say about the ground that we're standing on. I wonder what she would say about what's next. I don't know. And I'm going to ask you a question at the end, which I won't ask you now. Wait a second, you're going to say something.
Well, I was going to ask, I've got a question for you about what next as well. So, but I'll ask it later.
Okay, okay,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
good.
So we'll see.
Good. Well, I'm so curious because this audience probably has never listened to anyone who has been the head of a union like you are. And it's a raucous union because of the fact that it's directors and choreographers, right? And I'm interested in what's the major issue that you're dealing with right now or that you were dealing with 2 years ago that you were trying to find your way through? And what are the life lessons that you've had that are helping you as you go through this?
I think we are at risk of not protecting the centrality of the director, not understanding the role of the director in the process of making this work, that it's been sort of chipped away at. And in some ways, directors have participated in sort of moving to a subservient position, particularly in the as sort of playwrights have risen. And we could talk about that for a long time, about sort of what that sequence is and why it has to be one or the other. But there's been sort of a shift culturally in the last 20 years of like where the director sits in the making of this work. And that is, that the issues around that have a huge impact on my ability to make sure basic protections of getting paid, pension, health, employment protections are hard to secure when that's a moving target, right?
Right.
And in part that it's, again, there's complicity on the part of directors in some ways who have, gone to be in such a supportive position of everyone, and they don't want to now hurt anybody's feelings. And so that makes it harder for me to do my work. But I do think what serves me well is because I was in the trenches with you all for so long, and my path has crossed so many extraordinary directors, and I think directors know that I know what they do, and I know what that role is, that allows me to both pull you out, not you, but all of you out, to like, okay, so you guys got to sit up straight, and then we can figure out what we need, and then we can do that together. But it's hard to do in this moment because because directors are responding to so much, and because our cultural narrative around the director is, whether it's Hollywood or beyond, you've got the bad boy director, right? It's like so when you start to hit a place in our culture where we want workplaces to be appropriate, to be safe, to be supportive, to be all of those things, there's kind of a sense that, if we can just hang the directors out, then it'll all be fine, because it's all about the director who has all the positional power.
Right.
All the power it's always the director that's the unreasonable one. And so really the role, I guess I'm kind of wandering, Molly, but it's a wandering thing.
I mean, what's hard about it is I think the shift came as the writers' union got stronger and stronger and stronger. And when the writers' union got stronger in terms of rights and responsibilities, the directors' union moved into that place where all the time people were talking about how the director is the midwife to the new play, which made it feel like you were just there delivering the baby, as opposed to being there to interpret. And I have to say, I found that with a lot of young directors now. They'll say, well, I'm not sure what so-and-so the writer wants. I said, no, you're actually here to interpret. They need you to see it from a different perspective. They've been in it for years often, and now it's really your job to pull it out. Or a director that will say to me, well, I want to do it exactly the way the writer wanted it to be done. I said, it's not possible. You're not in their head. I don't care how long you've worked with them. You are uniquely poised to make a difference to this piece. And I think that that's what's happened,
Well,
is that we've been sold bill of goods. I mean, that's a corny thing to say, but I think that people have continued repeating this piece about the role of directors and then have been upset about what they see in directors in other parts of the world that are auteur directors, who are really coming in and making a mad and crazy and beautiful mess out of what they're doing and then pulling it together, so that you're going in to see something that is a wonderful revelation of a play, as opposed to American directors who were serving. Sometimes you are in service of, but if you don't lead, you're not actually directing.
well, you're kind of invited in to be, it's like, we'd like you to do this project, we'd like you to, come in, please don't make any fuss, don't press too hard, it should be good, and then you gotta go. So there's kind of it's a bit of an assembly line. It also has these plays, every theater is doing like a lot of the same plays, so you become, kind of technicians. It's like to come in and stage another production of another production of another production, as opposed to, a lot of the great directors that, I saw the work here, and even at the Scattle Rep when I was there, wouldn't get hired today.
Right.
They wouldn't get hired today because they were just too bold and too visionary, and maybe too difficult, too demanding, maybe. But that's like what drew us to the theater, right? That kind of, I was, reading your mission statement here, Molly, and the last words, and dangerous in the American spirit. And how do you really, how do you embrace that right now? And how do you embrace that for directors? Like, can you hire and bring in directors and say, be dangerous?
It's interesting. This new center was the architect of it, being Tom. He designed the center through the mission statement, particularly deep and dangerous in the American spirit. That's what drove him, and that's what made me fall in love with him, is that he was actually going to our mission and the ideas that were important to us as a theater organization as far as the creation of this new center, right? As opposed to the kind of architect where it's really much more about ego. Big Tom had an ego, don't get me wrong, but he also got that it was about, this was the engine underneath the organization. So, for example, up in the rehearsal hall right now, we have János Salas, who is a brilliant Hungarian director, both a film and a theater director. He does iconic pieces of theater, and we've brought him in to do Angels in America. Now, 20 years ago, I brought him in to do Streetcar Named Desire. Audience went wild. They hated it or loved it. That, to me, is an interesting theater piece. because it gets people talking and arguing about it. Now, Yamish is here, and we had more actors, over 1,000 actors just in Washington DC, that wanted to be in this production. Now, part of it definitely is, it's Angels in America, and it's one of the great masterpieces of the 20th century. Part of it is just him. And has it been wild? Has it been complicated? Absolutely. We now have 27 chandeliers hanging in the Fitzhandler space. Has he been somebody who has asked big questions of our technical staff, asked big questions of our artistic development people? Absolutely. Do I think that that's important for the theater? Yes. Yes. Why? Every theater has to have a range. But then you might have another project that you think, oh, we're going to want something that is interpreted in a sense, hewing more closely to some of these ideas. Might be the right director for that. But one of the things that's always been important to me here, Laura, is if we're working with a writer where it's a brand new play, having discussions with him or her about who are you desperate to work with, right? Somebody you've worked with before, or somebody you've never worked with. And so then we begin to have those kinds of conversations, because you need to have that kind of combination in a season. Everybody needs to be kind of rustled around a bit by someone like Yana Sass. And has it been complicated for people? Absolutely it has. In the right way, because it's about the art form, right? It's about what's best for the art form.
Can we talk about perseverance?
Yep.
Because talk about kind of, risky, fear-inducing. I mean, the idea of doing what you did in Alaska. And we were talking earlier about when we first met, but I met you earlier through other people, because while I was in Seattle, people would stop in Seattle on their way to Perseverance. So,
Right.
Ezra Knight, Catherine Ezra, living stage actor,
Yep.
remains
Love
a dear friend, on his way to, and I was like, what's happening in Alaska? Or Alan Lee Hughes, who was also, they'd come
Absolutely.
through Seattle and they'd go up to work with you. And I was like, who is she and what is happening up there? And Perseverance, what a weird name for a theater. It's sort of, when you think back on what you did there, when you reflect from where you're sitting here on what you did there, what does that feel like today?
It feels like that was the launching pad for this. That was a small version of it. Because that was of, by, and about Alaskans. What is this? Of, by, and about Americans. I just wrote it really big. Right? So all the lessons that I learned there, because I did a lot of new work there. We did a lot of work with the community and with various communities. We've continued that kind of work here because it's so important and impactful, because every theater is very specifically about a time and a place, as opposed to, oh, it's this national thing. It's got to be, what are we doing for this group right now? We experimented with lots of things there. Worked with Czech designers, worked with, we were kind of fearless. Had a company of actors for about 10 years. And always searching. Built pieces just through improvisation. And then threw them up in front of the audience. Did one piece that was just the first chapter of the Bible. Started it inside the theater with a mud pit. Turned the whole inside of the theater with a mud pit. Had a big glass case that God walked in and dove into. And come back out. And then, to the audience's surprise, pulled Adam out of the mud, nude. and then used the rib to pull Eve out. And when everybody got kicked out of the garden, because of course she ate the apple, there were two little children with big plumes of fire that kicked the whole audience out. We all got kicked out. And then went to the backyard of the theater where we had people dumping huge buckets and garbage cans of water over the side of the building, hitting some of the audience when we had Noah in the ark. So we were always doing things that were wild. Like at the end of Death of a Salesman, had some of our young guys drive a car all the way into underneath the theater with it screeching with the lights coming out in the theater. So we were always, okay, what can we do? Let's try this. Okay, nobody's done this before. Great, let's try it. So there was that kind of kick-ass energy that I adored. People hadn't toured very much at that time. So we would just go on a ferry boat and go to 2 or 3 communities and build theaters basically in little small communities, take over a Quonset hut for a weekend and have a big community potluck and do theater. I mean, so I love that energy. It's really freeing. Very different coming here to Washington, D.C., but trying to find ways to utilize that through the wonderful artists here.
Well, the board, I mean, because the scaling up was not insignificant, right? From, I mean, what's the size operation? That was not
$1 million, and this was 10 million, so it was 10 times the size.
That's like a big,
Yeah.
and that's not something every board has the vision to sort of see.
Right.
Who can sort of make that leap. Because that was a big move for you and for them.
Totally gutsy.
Yeah.
The board was totally gutsy. I was a complete dark horse.
Really smart.
They didn't know this lady from Alaska, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was kind of a crazy hire.
It was a
right?
crazy,
It was
it
like,
was a crazy
whoa,
hire.
what did they
And
think
how
about
the
that?
hell did that happen? You know, Suzanne, Blue Star Boy, my partner who's out here, Helga Tarver, who was on our board, wonderful member of the board. Do I see David out here? David Schifrin. Suzanne, probably 15 years ago, said to Helga, "Oh, Helga, when you first met Molly and she came in to talk to the search committee, were you impressed?" And she said, "Not so much." And then she said, "But the second time she came in, then we knew." And I thought, how interesting that she was able to change her mind, too. So that also tells me something about the board here. I mean, we've been incredibly lucky with people who've been on the board who've been fiercely connected to Arena Stage. From the time that you were here, you know, the Lee Rubensteins, the David Schifrins now. We've Decker Angstrom, who's our Angstrom, who's the head of our board now. You know, we've just been really, really fortunate with bold leadership. And that's not true with a lot of theaters. You may think it's true, but it's not true. We had that at Perseverance Theater too. And it helps that person really fulfill whatever those dreams are. Because the dreams have to be slightly crazy. If they aren't slightly crazy, here's what happens. The audience drifts away.
Yeah.
Audiences can smell when something is safe all the time. They can smell when you're taking risks. They don't know what it is, but it's an animal thing, I think.
And I think sometimes, listen, I'm not running one of these institutions right now, and I don't, you know, I don't know how you do it, Edgar. You know, I mean, I just kind of bow down to everybody that's doing it. They're extraordinarily difficult to do right now. But I do think there's a relationship between the work that's being produced and challenges with the audience. And there's kind of a spiral of,
Yeah.
like, we have to be careful, 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 careful.
Yeah,
But then if I don't have to go, I'm not going. And so if I'm not going, they're not going, right? I mean, the work has to have that edge. It has to be something that you have to see, and not necessarily because it's, excellent, whatever that means, and whatever aesthetic you're talking about, but because there's something dangerous, new, unknown, surprising, and we're kind of hedging our bets on safe, known.
yep,
It was popular before, it'll
Yeah.
be popular again, and I just don't, we have to talk about those two things. Like, is the work good enough to, be magnetic enough for people to be coming? And then how can we do the work that we can afford to do? So I know that balance is impossible right now.
it is. It's totally impossible. We just finished this run of Ride the Cyclone that was in the Krieger Theater and had chosen it for our young audience, right? Because wanted to keep building on that audience. I call it the Dear Evan Hansen audience, right? And what was fascinating about it is our older audiences in general loved it as much as our younger audience. And I was stopped by a couple of women who were 75 years old saying to me, "It changed my life." I said, "How did it change your life?" And they said, the last scene, because it really is about death and resurrection, right? And took us into the light somehow. And so that made them feel right about that time in their lives. Did we know that? No. We were choosing it for an entirely different reason. So that's where you don't always know, but you have to go where your hunch is. And I think part of what starts to happen is people start to get really codified. Oh, we'll do this because this is what the audience liked before. Oh, we can't do this because the audience didn't like it before. Who knows? And really, who knows coming out of the pandemic? We're not sure at all where audiences are. When we think about what the future of the theater is, 75 years ago, 80 years ago, these not-for-profit theaters were created in response to New York by saying, we shouldn't have to go to New York to see theater.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have to just go see companies tour. We need to be doing great theater in our own communities. That was a revolution. There's 1,200 theaters now. They're happening all over the country. And I kept asking myself, when's the next revolution? We're in it now. You all are now experiencing what the next revolution is. And the next revolution has to do with a whole shift in leadership. It has to do with, we see you at American theater. It has to do with the way in which people are thinking about theater. It has to do with what's happening online. It has to do with film. It's all of these things that have all come together. And oftentimes when you're in the middle of something, you can't see what that next step is.
Well, do you think, though, that's really yes, and the founding of this movement, the creation of this ecosystem we have, really did have, like, they knew what they were doing.
Yes.
They were doing it together. In support, there was like a network of, and things were happening all over, and there was a connectivity. And of course there was national cultural policy, and there were, there was a lot of other things happening. What I'm not sure I see right now, Molly, is what is the thing, it's clear there's a revolution, but I'm not clear what we're fighting for, what we're moving towards, it feels chaotic, sometimes random, not, I worry that we've we've taken to, it's kind of the divide and conquered. We've been divided so that we can, I think a lot about the culture wars of the
Yep.
late 80s, early 90s, and that was really, that's the beginning of
Yep.
our problems.
Yep.
And that we aren't really tracing it back far enough, and that we're, they, the extreme right, sort of taught us that, they attacked us, and then they taught us how to attack ourselves, and so now they're off doing something else. And so we're just, they're just gonna watch us, eat each other alive, and then we'll all be gone, and that'll be great. So I don't know what we're doing. Now, maybe it's not for me to know, right? Because I'm on this side of the,
Yeah.
middle of my career or whatever. But I don't know what we're doing.
During Maplethorpe, I think a lot of you remember those times. His photographs were deemed pornographic, and Congress then took away almost all the money from the arts, from the NEA. An organization like Arena that used to get $500,000, now we're lucky if we get 50,000.
Yeah.
That's, when you look at that, it's soul crushing, right? But I do think that what happened at that time is the arts didn't actually push back. And I think you're right, Laura. I think what happened is that taught the arts to eat their young, or eat their old, right? Eat each other up somehow, as opposed to actually we're supposed to be a mirror on society. We need to be fighting this as opposed to infighting. Edgar Dobie, who I think is out here, Edgar, I hope you don't mind if I say this, he's called it the death of expertise. And I think that that's true. I think that's a piece of what we're in, because it ends up being, at the time that you're talking about, Laura, at the beginning of the not-for-profit movement, there was a coalescence of people who were leaders in different communities who were leading. I actually don't think they all knew what they were doing. I'll go back to that, because you were saying they were clear. I think they were probably confused in some of the ways that we are now, although there were enough bright lights that had through lines that other people could join. I don't know if that's true right now. I don't know how many leading voices you would say, oh, okay, they have found a way through. I don't know how many Zelda Fitch Handlers you have right now. I don't know how many Gordon Davidsons you have right now. And is that just because we were young at that point, looking at people who were doing that, or is it true that we don't have that because it's become very diffuse? It's become very diffuse, and a lot of conversation, a lot of change. There's been a lot of change that's happened in the last couple of years. And it's almost like
the rigor. Do you know the SVOG money, so one of the relief programs during the pandemic that went to arts organizations. So coming out of, we saved the NEA by a couple of things. One, we went away from organizational support, so you don't get operating support anymore, you only get project support. So that way, we're going to ask you to censor yourself and only ask to get funding for projects that are going to pass muster with the National Council and the powers that be. But the other thing we're going to do is they inserted the decency clause, right? So that said everything that the NEA funds will meet the, I'm not going to get it right, but the norms, the norms of the community norms isn't going to offend anyone in the community. And that went in, and there was like a couple of brush fires, and then it went away, and it didn't go away. No, the brush fires went away; they were extinguished, and now it's just become okay. We do projects, and we sign that thing that says whatever we're going to produce isn't going to offend anyone. So it's just become, we just do that, and nobody ever calls you out on it, but it doesn't matter. It's there.
it's still there.
SVOG money had a decency clause in it.
Oh, dear.
And I don't think anybody knew. And when I shared that with a couple of people who've done some pretty dicey, racy stuff to try to get some energy around that, it's like, hey, you know, to a couple of writers and directors who've done some stuff that's been, you know, quite on the edge. It was like, oh, you're kidding. Okay. And then go on about the business. I mean, I tried to actually light a fire around that. I couldn't get anybody's attention.
Well, you know, it's interesting to me that you say that, because I've been asking people, in this moment where so much is happening in this country, where are the great composers who are writing protest music? When we were kids, you know, it was everybody from Joni Mitchell, I mean, you name it, Bob Dylan. Where are they?
Yeah.
And a young friend of mine said they use all of their energy and they put a post on Facebook and then they're done. They don't have a need to write. So I think that's what I mean by it keeps being so diffuse that it's hard to kind of grab a hold of it and push through. But I love what you're saying about the decency clause. Edgar, did you know that, about the decency clause?
Yes, we had already produced a decent.
Well, see, this
Well done.
this is why Edgar Dobie is so
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
What he does, because you didn't even mention that to me. Thank you, Edgar, for just shouldering it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's a tricky time.
Well, and what are we supposed to do as artists? I mean, our job as artists has always been to push against the edges, right? That's our job. That's our job, to push in that way. I mean, it's also our job to comfort. It's also our job to love our audiences, to surprise our audiences, to shock them in some ways, to bring them to consciousness, to innervate them, to do all these other things. And if we're not doing that, then people just drift away. They'll look for something else.
Yeah, because we do. Yeah, because we do want that in our life, even if we're just, and maybe we can get it on Netflix.
Maybe Netflix. And, you know, people pretend to know what audiences want. And they'll, you know, my favorite story was in Alaska. Finally, I let the staff talk me into doing a survey, and the survey went out, what's your favorite piece of theater? And this one person said, it's all the comedies. What's your favorite play? Macbeth. Okay.
Oh, my God.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then you start looking at, you know, what's our job? Our job is to synthesize the world and put it back. Synthesize the world and bring it to the audience as something that either moves forward, moves backward, pushes, pulls.
And so what do you do with the, because and, you know, the art is the mirror that reflects, not the
Yeah.
hammer that shapes, or
Yeah.
the hammer that shapes, not the mirror that reflects. So
Right.
you're a mirror that reflects,
Yep, totally.
not a hammer that shapes. Shapes,
Both.
both.
Both ends.
Both and, yeah. She's doing the ands, right?
Yeah.
I think and.
I think "and" is a really important word right
It
now.
is.
It's like the best word. Like I want to start a
And.
revolution. Like that it's
Hashtag and.
Hashtag "and." You know, that it's, I think as we're so much of what everybody's looking for, the right pedagogy around, you know, our training for EDI and anti-racism and safe workspaces, and like there's one way to do, and it's like, yes, and there's this way, and there's this way, and everybody get on a path, but how, you know, how the work is approached, it's got to be an and, right?
Well, it's so hard because when people say, I want to have a safe rehearsal hall, rehearsals are not safe. Rehearsals are terrifying. They're supposed to be. They're supposed to be. You know, yes, you have to feel like you have confidence in each other. Yes, you have to feel like everybody's got your back. And if you're not actually exploring and doing things that are scary for people, you aren't really making theater. You won't feel that buzz in the audience without it. It won't happen. You know, here at Arena, some of our young people have said they don't feel safe in their lives. And I was saying to somebody, well, look at Uvalde. How many people they had? Over 300 people, nobody walked in. And so I went back to something that happened when I first came to Washington, D.C. when I was 19 years old, and it was a very dangerous place. And my sister and I took self-defense classes by a guy who was a military guy. We took him for several weeks. He taught me things that I use now. I've used it 5 or 6 times in my lifetime, including when a man was tracking me. I played as if I was absolutely bug shit crazy out in the street. Another time where through just big karate yells, we were able to break up a gang of kids who were trying to steal our purses. Because the only way you actually get to feel safe is when you are confident in yourself. So we're doing some self-defense classes here at Arena for anybody that wants to. And I think we have like a quarter of the staff that are going to take them. To give them some skills to be able to live and be in the world in a different way. Because, and it's the same thing in, go ahead.
I was just, I don't want to, I interrupted you.
You go.
Well, my work, like what I'm doing right now,
Yes.
is we're trying to put together, working with employers, collective bargaining. We're about to go into negotiations for one of our big contracts right now, and this question of training, rehearsal hall, all of these. So there are I've had 2 different perspectives from directors. I'm going to ask you right now. It's going to be like a focus group with Molly. Excuse me. I'm going to ask Molly something. When it comes to training for a company, and there's a lot of training taking place, and we as a union, we support training. Everybody should get the training that they need, particularly around sexual harassment,
Right.
non-discrimination, anti-harassment, completely, all in it. When does it take place? Where does it take place? And what is the director's role in being involved in that? So we've had situations where you're 3 days into rehearsal and the trainers come in and say, we're going to spend the afternoon, and the director's like, you are? And so they take over the afternoon and do a training. And at the end of some of these trainings, if they're good, people are shook a little bit, right? They're, that maybe they've been, they're upset, they're filled with sorrow, possibly tears, they're upset, possibly angry, and then it's break and you're in, and so you say, okay, scene 3, and you've got actors who are not ready to, and of course you've begun to set a safe space that's been completely derailed by good intentions. So like where those trainings take place, how they take place, what the director needs to know about who's doing the training and what the approach is to the training. So we're going to be asking employers, Edgar, this will come up next year, which I think is completely reasonable. We're gonna be saying, train away. The director needs to meet whoever the trainers are before they come in the rehearsal hall. And the director gets a say on whether it's in the rehearsal hall or in another space.
Oh, great.
So I ask you,
Yeah,
like
another
some,
space.
see, and then some are like, no, I want it in my space, and some are like another space. So I think we're gonna ask for you to be able to decide whether you want
Yeah.
that energy not in the rehearsal hall.
Right.
And you're saying, I don't want it in the rehearsal hall. We have to find another space to do the training.
Well, you'd have to find some way to both separate it and draw a through line to the rehearsal hall at the same time.
Without actually doing it in the rehearsal
Yeah,
hall.
yeah. I mean, that's my knee-jerk reaction. Tomorrow I could say something entirely different.
Well, and you'll have a chance to, because, we do survey the membership
Oh, what a-
on this.
What a great
It's
question.
so those are so when you asked earlier, like, how is this, these are the things that, I mean, you gotta get people paid better, you know, we gotta figure out, you know, pension plan and the pandemic, you know, all of those things. We have to do all of those things, but this is the stuff that's pretty interesting to me and puts you back in the
Right,
center of the,
conversation.
yeah, as sort of part of the problem solver, not the problem maker.
That's great. That's great. I love that. I love that. I bet it's 10 too, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's after. Well, you can see why she's an incredible leader. You can see why she's a thoughtful leader. And you can see why she is somebody who constantly takes action. SDC is the best of the unions, and it's because of you. So join us at the bar, and then you can ask those deep probing questions, but you already kind of heard some of the answers. Thank you guys very much for coming.